There's a spell that once unleashed would devastate entire nations, if not an entire fantasy world. Kings and queens would lose power, unable to pay even a single knight what it would cost to feed himself and his horse. Wealthy merchants would become day laborers overnight, and banks would be set ablaze by enraged mobs. Even the mighty dragons would be robbed of all of their wealth. No matter how envious, they would defend their house-sized treasure pile. The spell that would be able to pull off all of this would not be a spell conceived and casted by an undead overlord seeking to end all life, not by a vengeful lord who failed to conquer the world and now wants to destroy it so that no other could have what he had been denied, nor by demons seeking to slaughter indiscriminately, but by successful alchemists and magic casters who might not even understand the consequences of their own actions, but who would profit immensely from casting this very, very dangerous spell. And I'm talking about nothing fancy like fireball or calling lightning down on cities. I'm not talking about miasmas of deaths and disease. I'm not talking about resurrection magic or healing magic. I'm talking about transmutation magic. And the transmutation of more common metals like lead, iron, or aluminum into extremely rare and precious metals like silver, gold, or platinum. Because the transmutation spell would create something that we have been familiar with for quite some time now. On a truly enormous scale. Inflation. See? The reason why rare metals such as copper, silver or gold are stores of value and have thus been currency for a good part of our own history and are still used as a store of value even today is because they are scarce. They are very easy to transport because they have a very low mass compared to their value, and a lot of work, a lot of wealth can be stored in a single gold piece simply because you need to work for weeks or months on end to earn it. Because they are divisible, reforgeable, non-perishable, and still have utility. Even now that copper is not a currency anymore, it still has its value because it's a very, very important input in, for example, copper wiring, while gold, for example, is used in electronics. And once wizards would be able to transmutate common metals into these extremely rare ones, they would not only be able to buy everything they want, since now they have an infinite money glitch in their own world, but buying iron with gold, transmutating the iron into gold, and then repeating this process over and over, would quickly increase the available amount of gold in the economy, while goods and services, be they food or the service of mercenaries, or even just a maid, would become ever scarcer. And the actual value these goods and services have would then be paid by inflation. Simply speaking, everyone who doesn't have this magical money glitch, this gold printer glitch, would pay the difference, since their own gold would become less and less valuable, and thus less and less able to purchase goods and services, to the point that gold might be rejected as a currency altogether. This could again break the economy of entire nations, no matter if republic or kingdom. And curiously, the most affected by this shift would not be the poorest and weakest, the peasants on their fields, especially if they are in debt or own land, because the debts would be worth less and less, and could eventually be paid off with a single loaf of bread, while any landowner would see the worth of its land skyrocket, and the peasants would be profiting from this inflation in other ways too. See, while in the early Middle Ages the peasants had to pay their lords in either goods, like bread, wine or grain, or work on the land for a certain amount of time, the land of their lords that is, for no compensation at all. This system was later changed so that peasants only had to pay a fixed sum of money to their lords. And again, let me stress the term fixed, meaning that inflation would see the amount of taxes levied upon the peasantry shrink to almost nothing, while simultaneously the gold reserves of every trader, every treasurer, and again every dragon would lose most, if not all of its value, that is beyond its utility of course. And this would interrupt trade and led to a breakdown of the economy, and of course the noble lords and debt holders would seek to change the system to stay at the top, while those who profit from this sudden inflation would seek to preserve it. And when peasants fight against their liege lords in order to preserve the current fixed money tribute, while the lords want to reform it, when traders have suddenly no way to pay each other and even refuse to sell their goods simply because they know that by the time they redeem their gold, it will have lost half of its value, then every nation would descend into infighting, because now, suddenly, the self-interest of most groups making up the various states would have a very vested but contradictory incentive. And of course, the winners in all of this would be the nation or the sorcerer school that can now essentially print gold and might have already bought land and used the resources generated on it to purchase the loyalty of various politicians or just armies to then conquer the entire world. And interestingly, the whole world, or rather anyone who used the gold currency system, would see this conquest as a positive thing, and the sorcerers as an anchor of stability, because now they have this new currency that doesn't lose half of its value every other week. Perhaps something that is very finite, even to sorcerers, and has also great utility, namely magic or mana crystals, that can sap the magical energies of anyone who touches them. And these crystals would then be able to fuel spells. With this, everyone would generate some sort of passive income in the form of mana, in the sense that just their natural mana could then be used to fuel a spell that, for example, plows the field for a certain amount of time, catches a fish, or plants the next harvest on a certain numbers of square miles. And with this clever and cunning move, the peasants would be on the side of the sorcerers, since, let's say, a third of their mana is now be given over to the local lord in the form of recharging his own mana crystals, which also would ensure the loyalty of the nobility, while the peasants could keep everything they grow on their own or rather the lord's fields. And thus, just a relatively small amount of wizards, perhaps not even 1,000, could unanchor the entire economy of a fantasy world and then rule it as its new overlords, and not entirely coincidentally create a world in which magic users would be rich almost by default, and where spells and magical potential, aka the very things these sorcerers excel in, would be basically everything. Of course, the other nations would likely not just sit idly by and watch their own currency lose all of its value, but might leverage whatever forces they could muster and try to stop the wizards, which also could lead to a very interesting and unusual style of guerrilla warfare, where wizards teleport away as soon as knights and archers arrive, and then suddenly appear on a farm or in a peasant village, in order to shower them with gold, while the knights are desperate to try to take out as many gold pieces out of the circulation as possible. Of course, the knights might decide that now that their salary has become less and less valuable, that they need to keep a fraction of the gold they confiscate for themselves, which again would serve the sorcerers quite well. But in any case, once Pandora's box has been opened, metal currencies would likely never occur again, which then would lead to new currencies like I said, magical gemstones or perhaps magical ores that can't be readily produced by magical means. And of course, the dragons will also be in the midst of all of this, and either have the time of their life, or be enraged to the point that they want to wipe out all magical non-dragon creatures just to stop inflation, which again is a very understandable motive. And with that said, now it's your turn. Do you agree with my idea of transmutation magic being that devastatingly powerful, and the scenarios are based on this assumption? Do you have ideas of your own? What could and would happen? Let me know down in the comment section. And while you type, I say thank you very much for watching and have a nice day.